Hello and welcome. This is Jed Disler, and you are listening to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. I'd like to talk about the Piano Sonata by Jean Barraqué, the French composer who lived from 1928 until 1973. He composed his piano sonata between 1950 and 1952. This is a large-scale work that represents post-war serialism, 12-tone music, in its most fundamental manifestation. And if you are familiar with the piano sonatas of Pierre Boulez, the first sonata from 1946 and the second sonata from 1948, you will get an idea of what Jean Barraqué's style is like. Boulez himself actually was kind of dismissive about the Barraqué sonata. I interviewed Boulez back in the year 2000, and I asked him about the Barraqué sonata, and he said, Barraqué was basically imitating my second sonata. He just, brushed it off. Maybe on the surface there's a kernel of truth to that, but the Barraqué is very, very different from Boulez because it's cast in a single movement that is divided into two continuous long sections. And the music often goes between large stretches of dense, dissonant flurries of notes and phrases, and strategically placed silences. Of course, being such a monumental work of total serialism, the Barraqué Sonata has been written about and analyzed and picked apart by scholars. But what about its effect on audiences? Is this music emotionally compelling, or is it just intellectually arid and even unlistenable? I'm not going to decide that for you, but I am going to talk about the Barraqué Sonata's recordings. It was first recorded by Yvonne Loriot, the wife of Olivier Messiaen, and she was a fervent champion of new music, and she recorded the Barraqué Sonata. She made its premiere recording in 1957 in the presence of the composer, and she was playing from the manuscript. And apparently during the recording sessions, he made many modifications and corrections. However, the sonata only got its first acknowledged public performance in 1967, and it was done by the Danish pianist Elizabeth Klein, not long after the sonata was finally made available in print. It was published by Aldo Bruzzicelli in Florence in 1966. The second commercial recording of the Barraqué Sonata came in 1969 with pianist Claude Heffler on the Telefunken label. This has never been on CD, so far as I know. There also have been recent recordings by Chen P. Hsien on the Telos label and Stefan Litvin on the CPO label. There's a live performance with Jean-Frédéric Neuberger on the Mireille label. I haven't yet heard Jean-Pierre Collot on the Winter and Winter label. And I also have not heard a live concert recording in 1972 with François Tilla that was only issued in 2019 on the Solstice label, and this pianist prepared his interpretation under the composer's supervision. I hope to hear that soon. The 1996 recording on the ECM label by Herbert Henk should be talked about because this pianist actually went back to the manuscript and he incorporated many, many corrections that eventually would find their way into the critical edition that was published by Bärenreiter in 2019. But if I had to recommend one recording of the Barraqué Sonata, I would choose the one made in 1972 by Roger Woodward. He worked on the piece with the composer, and in fact, Barraqué was so enthusiastic about Roger Woodward's playing that he said that he would write a second piano sonata and he would dedicate it to Roger Woodward. But at that time, the composer already was terminally ill, and it never happened. But in this performance, there's a real nervous energy to the virtuosic rapid passages that go way beyond just playing the notes. And there's even a singing quality to softer, more introspective passages. I first had this recording on LP when it came out on the Unicorn label. I think it was also on the EMI label on LP in the United Kingdom. But more recently, the Celestial Harmonies label brought Roger Woodward's Barraqué Sonata out on CD and remastered it from the original session tapes. In fact, many of Roger Woodward's recordings from the 1970s have been reissued on Celestial Harmonies. So if you are curious about the Barraqué Sonata, for whatever it's worth, I do recommend that you hear Yvonne Loriot, of course, for historic reasons, when the music was 5 years old and had no performing tradition. Not that there is any real performing tradition to speak of these days. I mean, very few people play it. And then I would also go to Herbert Hank for just his sheer pianistic sheen and I guess also his meticulous observance of the text. But for a combination of accuracy and a real feeling of performance, Roger Woodward on Celestial Harmonies is the way to go with the Barraqué Sonata. This is Jed Disler, and you have been listening to the Piano Maven podcast. Thank you for tuning in, and happy listening.